This is the Ultrarunning History Podcast. I'm your host, Davey Crockett. Thanks for coming. This is episode 160. In this episode, I will finish the story of Ted Corbitt, the father of American ultrarunning. This is part 3, which will tell of his amazing streak of ultramarathon wins, American records, and a national championship. There are now 10 books in the Ultrarunning History series available on Amazon. They tell about a rich history of ultra-distance running for more than 200 years. It includes the unique bestseller Grand Canyon Rim-to-Rim History. Learn about the construction of the trails, bridges, and very early canyon crossings. There are hundreds of fun stories, such as the pack rats at Phantom Ranch. Get them on Amazon. On Amazon, search for Ultrarunning History, Davey Crockett. Perhaps Ted Corbitt's most notable achievement in the sport of long-distance running was his groundbreaking work in course measurements. He said, "My initiating the accurate course measurement program in the USA is easily the most important thing that I did in the long-distance running scene. For the sport long-distance running to gain legitimacy, a system was needed to verify performances, records, and ensure that courses were consistently measured in the correct manner." Obtaining accurate measurements for the courses had been important for over 150 years. During the 19th century pedestrian era of ultrarunning, indoor tracks varied in length depending on the size of the arena. Professional surveyors and engineers were employed to measure the tracks down to the inch. This was important in 6-day races as runners would circle the tracks thousands of times and massive wagers were made on how far runners would go. Mistakes were made at times. In October 1879, a couple weeks after the 5th Astley Belt race held in Madison Square Garden, won by Charles Rowell of England with 530 miles, the track was remeasured for another race and was discovered to be several feet short per lap, which meant Rowell actually instead covered 524 miles, 6 miles less. In the 20th century, ultrarunning returned to road courses. With the introduction of the automobile, odometers were typically used. Those devices were rarely calibrated accurately as auto manufacturers liked to have them register more miles than actually traveled. Another important example. As the famed Western States Trail was used by the horse endurance race, the Tevis Cup, in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, and for the early years of the Western States 100-mile foot race, it later was discovered in the 1980s that the course was not even close to 100 miles. It was no more than 89 miles, more than 10% short. It wasn't initially a 100-mile race.
Organizers of the PNC Milwaukee Marathon last weekend created a course that was 0.8 of a mile too short. Participants were sent emails with the bad news.
As Corbitt went to England in the early 1960s to compete in London to Brighton, he became acquainted with John Jewell, a founding member of the Roadrunners Club in England. In 1961, Jewell wrote a paper describing the process of road race course measurement in England. He refined a method of using calibrated bicycle wheels for the measurement. Corbitt was convinced that a method of accurate course measurement was needed for American long-distance races. He pointed out, "The U.S. has sent marathoners and walkers to the Olympic Games who thought they were in a certain time range, but who in reality were several minutes slower on full-length courses. This is unnecessary, since it is possible to measure courses accurately." He exported many of Jewell's ideas, did his own research, and published a historic 29-page booklet in 1964 entitled Measuring Road Running Courses. He evaluated all the typical methods of measuring courses and concluded that the best method was to use a calibrated cycle wheel which was extremely accurate and could be used rapidly. The concept was simple: to use a counter similar to the ones found on a surveyor's wheel to keep track of the rotations of a bicycle wheel. He included details of how to construct a homemade measuring wheel. In 1970, Alan Jones, an IBM computer engineer, inspired by Corbitt, made the wheel measuring process easier when he invented the Jones counter, which Corbitt endorsed and distributed to many races. Corbitt's efforts for accurate road course measurement led to the formation of AAU's National Standards Committee. He established America's first course certification program and served as the country's chief course certifier from 1964 to 1984.
My father's most significant contribution to the sport was establishing a system to accurately measure the running courses. That's the system still used today to measure courses across the country.
During 1964, 5 ultras were put on in the New York City area by the New York City Roadrunners Club from 37 to 40 miles. Corbitt won them all. Their purpose continued to help runners prepare to compete in London to Brighton. That year, Corbitt, along with 6 others, including members of the Millrose AA team in New York City, entered the iconic race that was held in late September. To prepare, Corbitt wanted to achieve a 300-mile training week for the first time using the 3-day Labor Day weekend. He wanted to run 3 consecutive 64-mile days. On the 3rd day, he wisely pulled out after 51 miles. He still pushed himself for the rest of the week and reached 303 miles. At London to Brighton, Corbitt finished in 2nd place, only 58 seconds behind the winner, Bernard Gomersall of England. The other Americans fared well. The Millrose AA team narrowly lost the team title to the Tipton Harriers. Thanks to Corbitt, Americans were finally competitive in international ultrarunning. Corbitt wrote encouraging words for those considering trying to run ultramarathons. The Millrose men found the experience of becoming 50-milers not as difficult as expected once the soul-killing summer training was finished. The message is that the trained marathoner can race up to 30 or 40 miles with no added training. With a little added training, you can run 50 miles. During 1964, Corbitt competed in 24 races of distances of 4 miles or more. While he was competitive in nearly all of them, all of his wins came in the ultramarathons. In 1965, 5 ultras were put on in New York City, all won by Corbitt. On Labor Day week, he broke his training record for a week with 312 miles, this time succeeding in achieving 3 consecutive 64-mile days. At the 1965 London to Brighton, he again placed second to the Comrades champion Gomersall in another close race. Gomersall was arguably the greatest ultrarunner in the world that year, and Corbitt was close behind him. 3 other American runners also finished. Corbitt's loss was a disappointment, and he later learned that if he had pushed hard one more time near the finish, that Gomersall would have conceded the victory to him. Thanks to the efforts of Aldo Scandura and Corbitt, the AAU was convinced to recognize a national 50-mile championship to be held in 1966. The American record for 50 miles was not known at that time. It was held by a professional, Dennis Donovan of Massachusetts, who ran the distance in 6 hours and 18 minutes in 1880 in Providence, Rhode Island. The amateur record was 6:46, set in 1935 by Hugo Kapanen of Brooklyn, New York, during a metropolitan 50-mile run on Staten Island. The 50-mile track world record was held by Gerald Walsh of South Africa, who ran 50 miles in 5:16 in England in 1957. The International Amateur Athletic Foundation still did not recognize the 50-mile distance and didn't keep records on it. The first U.S. National 50-miler was held on July 17, 1966, on a road course on Staten Island, New York. Corbitt planned to win the race, but in the ultra races held in New York during the first few months of 1966, he lost some races to his new main competitor, Jim McDonough, who was training for London to Brighton. New York was in a heat wave leading up to the 50-mile championship race day. As Corbitt was packing for the race, he noticed that the heat had melted the glue in his running shoes so that the sole came loose. He grabbed an old pair of leather shoes and hoped for the best. Right after the starting gun, Corbitt and McDonough separated from the others. By mile 15, it was already hot at 80 degrees. Corbitt started developing blisters because of the old shoes, but he still hit the marathon mark in 2:49. He was still in front at mile 40, but only a few yards ahead of McDonough. On the last loop, Corbitt crashed with severe dehydration and started weaving and staggering with terrible cramps. He could barely walk. McDonough went into the lead and won the first 50-mile championship in 5:52.27 for a 50-mile American record, 20 minutes ahead of Corbitt. That year, both Corbitt and McDonough ran London to Brighton, with Corbitt 5th and McDonough 10th. Corbitt was perhaps overtrained. He logged 862 miles during August and again ran 312 miles during Labor Day week. After London to Brighton, Corbitt stayed in England because he had been invited to run in a 50-mile invitational track race on October 15, 1966, at Walton-on-Thames with 13 starters. Because of overnight rain, Turn 1 was underwater and the backstretch was very slippery. Corbitt reported,
"The runners splashed and skidded through this for 29 miles, by which time the groundskeepers and volunteers had used brooms and giant foam rubber sponges to clear the water away. No one attempted to run the race in spikes."
The runners were on world record pace from start to finish. South African Tommy Malone started out clocking sub-6-minute mile pace. The leaders reached 25 miles in about 2:30. Corbitt said,
"By this time, all pursuers were in various stages of decline, each having retreated into his own private fight with fatigue."
He hung in about 10th place for the first half of the race and then moved up. Alan Phillips, a virtually unknown runner from England, eventually went into the lead, and observers believed that he wouldn't last. He did hold on and broke the 50-mile track world record with 5 hours 12 minutes. Corbitt grabbed 5th with 5:54. The 50-mile national championship for 1968 was held on the road at Poughkeepsie, New York on Thanksgiving. Corbitt, age 48, entered. He had been recovering from injuries incurred while trying to avoid being bitten by a dog. 13 runners started, and the lead changed hands several times. After the second lap, Corbitt decided that he would try to push ahead. He said,
"It was a gamble to see if I could win. I really ran hard during the third big lap. I estimate I gained about 200 yards, but coming back on the fourth lap, I gave up the idea of winning again."
He trailed by about 100 yards. After 48 miles, Corbitt took the lead. He won with 5 hours 39 minutes for a new American 50-mile record, and he became the 50-mile national champion, the oldest to win a long-distance championship. He said,
"I consider myself lucky to have run as well as I did. My goal primarily was to finish. I'm thinking about retiring. I'll just phase myself out gradually."
In 1969, at age 50, Corbitt was invited to compete in the 100-mile race at Walton-on-Thames in England on October 26, 1969. He trained hard for the race, and even did a 100-mile training run to convince himself that he could go that distance. The invitational race was organized to try to break the recognized 100-mile track world record that stood at 12 hours 46 minutes, set by Wally Hayward in 1959. Dave Box's 12-hour 40-minute mark, set in 1968, was unfairly not recognized by the British Roadrunners Club. Corbitt first ran London to Brighton, finishing in second place. He recovered by doing runs on the grass. To concentrate on his 100-mile training, he avoided people, but being alone aggravated a depression issue. To help, he went sightseeing. He took a trip to Sweden at the invitation of a Swedish runner. Recovered, he could run 20-mile training days again. With 12 days to go, Corbitt returned to London. Once there, the reality of the 100-miler brought back all the depression and negativism. He became so homesick for his family that he was seriously tempted to take the next plane home, but he stuck with it and ran a 45-mile park-hopping training run. At the midnight start, Gordon Bentley of England moved directly into the lead unchallenged with a sub-7-minute mile pace. The rest of the runners quickly broke up into several bunches. But by 50K, he slowly faded, and the race turned out to be a contest between the world record holder Box and John Tarrant, the ghost runner. Tarrant took the lead by mile 40. Box panicked, seeing Tarrant go by, and he tried to catch him. The pace went wild. Corbitt recalled,
"The intermittent sprint duel was unbelievable. Box was determined to pass, and Tarrant was determined not to permit it, and with all those miles left."
Corbitt reached 50 miles in 6:13, feeling good, hoping that Tarrant and Box would annihilate each other. Others dropped out, and only 9 continued. Corbitt said,
"Somewhere along the way, I was aware that I was slowing up."
By mile 70, Tarrant had nearly caught up to Box. Suddenly, the two men were no longer in a marathon. They were in a sprint. Box surged forward, desperate to hold off Tarrant's charge. Tarrant's crew screamed at him to slow down. The two exchanged the lead back and forth. Box held the lead for several miles, but by mile 75 he cracked completely. Tarrant pushed ahead. Corbitt also experienced exhaustion around that point. He knew he couldn't quit. Corbitt struggled with terrible, painful thigh chafing until an official's wife found some petroleum jelly. He said,
"The mental part came in somewhere after 11 hours when I realized that everyone left in the race could finish if they could control their minds."
Tarrant crossed the finish in 12:31, a new track 100-mile world record by 15 minutes. With 5 minutes to go, Corbitt wasn't sure he could make it. The laps seemed to be long. He came in at 13:33, a new American record, beating the indoor track mark of John Hughes of New York City of 13:57 set in 1882. At the finish, Corbitt was offered beer and sandwiches. He replied that what he really needed was a new pair of legs. He had just finished the greatest ultra race of his career. The race killed Corbitt a little. He thought his running days were finished. He took 4 months to find enthusiasm for a long training run. The interest in American ultrarunning continued to spread thanks to Corbitt. A remarkable shift to the west was noticed in 1970 when the AAU 50-mile national championship was held in Rocklin, California. An astonishing 47 runners took part, with only 4 from the east, including Corbitt. He described it as, quote, "the greatest ambush since Custer's last stand." He reported,
"The Western aces all unloaded tremendous personal bests at 50 miles, while the Easterners all came up with substandard performances. The Californians took the first 5 places."
Bob Daines of Los Angeles, California, broke the American 50-mile record with 5:15. Corbitt, at age 51, finished 6th with 5:34, setting an age group record that still stands today. He was beat by 18-year-old Jose Cortez, who would break Corbitt's American 100-mile record the next year. Corbitt wrote in his newsletter,
"The East has failed to attract enough new blood onto the ultramarathon scene to meet the surging Western challenge. The Westerners have learned the obvious lesson that the 50-miler is not to be feared, but is a reasonable challenge for the trained marathoner.
There were several future Western States 100 finishers in the field that year. For several years, Corbitt had wanted to compete in a 24-hour race. He set his sights on running at the Walton-on-Thames 24-hour track race in Surrey, England, in November 1973. 16 runners entered, including Corbitt, age 53. The American 24-hour record was 150 miles, set by John Hughes in 1882 in Madison Square Garden. Corbitt knew he was nearing the end of his competitive running career, but he felt he had to run this race because this would probably be his last chance to run in such an ultimate challenge. He had 4 months to prepare and quickly increased his mileage from 65 to 220 miles per week. He ran 20 miles to work and 20 miles home each day. But the strain was huge, and he soon had terrible shin splints. Still, he ran 828 miles in July, 816 in August, 740 in September, and 696 miles in October. 10 days before the race, he ran 101 miles in 22 hours. It went very well, and he never felt tired. He was ready. Before the start, the 15 runners gathered in a small dressing room where they joked, laughed, and seemed totally relaxed. The casual pre-race atmosphere calmed Corbitt's jitters. The race started at 6 p.m. The weather was cool and wet, and the command "Go" was shouted. Gordon Bentley shot into the lead at a 6:15-mile pace, followed by his brother Ron Bentley. Corbitt was content to run near the rear. After 3 hours, Gordon Bentley had nearly reached 25 miles, and Corbitt was 2 miles back. Early on, Corbitt discovered that a blister had appeared on his heel, and he stopped in the medical tent for 2 minutes as they quickly taped it. The problem was solved. Ron Bentley took the lead during the 5th hour. Corbitt started to gain on the leaders, but hamstring pain grew alarmingly. At the 12-hour mark, Bentley reached 92 miles, and Corbitt was in second place with 81 miles, just 3 miles off the American 12-hour record. Bentley reached 100 miles in 13:09, and Corbitt was 12 miles behind, struggling with hamstring pain. His crew would stroke his legs with a hard hairbrush. They tried pushing his knees toward his chest, but the pain was excruciating. At 15:22, Corbitt finally reached 100 miles. His overall goal had been to reach 150 miles, but soon he realized that that would be impossible. At 18 hours, Corbitt mentally gave up. He did not walk off the track, but he stopped the constant struggling. During the 20th hour, the track became flooded with 2 inches of water from a torrential downpour. Runners became chilled to the bone as they slogged through the muddy water. Helpers tried to sweep the water off the track. A British masseur took Corbitt into a dry dressing room and tried to bring life to his thighs. He bundled up in a dry sweater and headed out again as the rain finally stopped. Ron Bentley broke Hayward's 24-hour world record of 159 miles with 1 hour to go. He then stopped, wrapped himself in a blanket, and then limped the rest of the hour, walking with his wife. The remaining battle was for second place. Corbitt had held it for 13 hours, but with 30 minutes to go, Peter Hart was within 2 laps of him. It was reported,
"The track was a madhouse. Fans and handlers clogged the track, making an obstacle course for the runners."
Corbitt's crew pled for him to go faster, but it was useless. He had nothing left, and with 20 minutes to go, Hart passed Corbitt. Then the gun was fired, and the nightmare was over for Corbitt. Bentley reached 161.3 miles, a new world track 24-hour record. Hart reached 136 miles, and Corbitt 134 miles. Corbitt was carried off like a, quote, rag doll to a hot tub where he and other runners lay for a half hour. He was then lifted out, dressed, and driven by car to a place where he was staying. He later said,
"That was my most disappointing result. Maybe I waited too late in life. Maybe it was just the accumulation of stress."
Into his 50s, Corbitt knew that his world-class running career was over. However, after 1973, He still had a very long marathon and ultra career, finishing 51 more long races. A series of injuries forced him to give up running and switch to walking in his 60s, but he never gave up being an active participant in the sport.
Here at the 1983 100-mile race in Shea Stadium, Ted supervises officials. To New York Roadrunner officials who followed, Ted passed on his respect for tradition and his passion for competition. This 100-miler consisted of 100 laps of a 1-mile course around Shea Stadium. Over the decades, Ted saw the sport he loved and its elite athletes gain notoriety. And holding the finish line tape here in 1983, on the right, Ted Corbitt.
Many recognitions came his way. In 1971, he was inducted into the Roadrunners Club of America Hall of Fame. He was deeply respected in the emerging ultrarunning sport. Legendary Ann Trayson paused to meet him during her 1991 100-mile world record run. In 1998, he was inducted into the Distance Running Hall of Fame, along with others including Frank Shorter and Bill Rogers. In 2001, at the age of 82, he walked 303 miles in a 6-day race held on Ward's Island in New York City. He wished he would have tried a 6-day race when he was young to join the few who had accomplished at least 600 miles. In 2003, Ted walked his last ultra, a 24-hour race at Flushing Meadows, New York. He covered 68 miles at the age of 84. During his entire running career, he finished a total of 223 marathons or ultras. He finished the Boston Marathon 22 times. In 2004, he was the first inductee into the American Ultrarunning Hall of Fame. In his last public speech in November 2007, he said,
I became addicted to running long distance runs and inspired others to do it better. In addition to training extensive mileage, I spent years doing administrative stuff in the background to help our sport survive and grow.
Ted Corbitt passed away on December 12, 2007 at the age of 88. USA Track and Field's Men's Ultrarunner of the Year is named after him. In 2014, the 228th Street at Broadway in New York City was named Ted Corbitt Way. This is near the home that he lived in for many years. He was truly the father of American ultrarunning. He is missed, but not forgotten. With that, this is Davy Crockett, and this is the Ultra Running History Podcast. I hope you run fast and far, enjoy life, get outdoors, and most of all, stay safe and don't take unnecessary chances.